I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd make the choices I did, but life has a way of pushing you to the edge, doesn't it? My name is Abigail Anderson, and this is my story, a story of love, loneliness, and a moment of weakness that changed everything. It feels like yesterday when I married Anderson. He was everything I ever wanted: strong, dependable, and fiercely loyal. A U.S. Navy SEAL, he was the kind of man who made you feel safe just by being in the same room. But with that safety came sacrifice. His job meant long deployments, missed birthdays, and empty spaces at the dinner table. I knew what I was signing up for when I said I do, but I didn't realize how heavy the loneliness would feel. And then there was Ethan, my stepson, a sweet, shy 15-year-old boy who looked so much like his father that it sometimes took my breath away. When Anderson and I got married, Ethan was just a kid, but over the years he became my anchor. With Anderson gone so often, Ethan and I grew close. Maybe too close. But let me start at the beginning, because that's where the cracks in our perfect little family first began to show. Our home was a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in San Diego, California, white picket fence, a well-kept lawn, and a basketball hoop in the driveway. The picture of the American dream. But dreams have a way of hiding the messy parts, don't they? Anderson was the kind of man who lived for his job. As a SEAL, he was deployed more often than not, leaving me to hold down the fort. I didn't mind at first. I had my volleyball classes to teach, my friends to meet for coffee, and Ethan to take care of. But as the years went by, the emptiness started to creep in. Ethan was a good kid, quiet, polite, and always eager to please. He lost his mother when he was just a baby, so he didn't have many memories of her. I tried to fill that void as best as I could. We'd cook together, watch movies, and even play volleyball in the backyard. He was my little shadow, always following me around, asking questions, and making me laugh. But there was one thing missing in my life: a child of my own. Anderson and I had talked about it early in our marriage, but his deployments kept getting in the way. When I retire, he'd say, "We'll start a family." But retirement felt like a distant dream, and my biological clock was ticking louder every year. The day Anderson left for his latest deployment, I felt the weight of his absence more than ever. He kissed me goodbye at the door, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and promised he'd be back soon. But soon was a relative term in his line of work. That first night without him, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, staring at the blank TV screen. The house was too quiet, too empty. I could hear the faint sound of Ethan's video games upstairs, but it wasn't enough to fill the silence. The weeks turned into months, and the loneliness became a constant companion. I threw myself into my work, coaching volleyball at the local community center, but even that didn't help. I missed Anderson, his laugh, his touch, the way he made me feel like the most important person in the world. Ethan became my solace. We spent more and more time together, and I started to see him as more than just my stepson. He was my friend, my confidant, my little piece of Anderson when his father wasn't around. But looking back, I realize I was blurring the lines between mother and friend, between love and something else entirely. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan and I were playing volleyball in the backyard. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the yard, and we were laughing like we didn't have a care in the world. But then something changed. I went to hug him after a particularly good play, and I felt it, the hardness of his innocent penis, the unmistakable hardness pressing against me. I froze, my mind racing. Was this really happening? Was this my fault? I pulled away quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed, but the damage was done. The air between us was suddenly different, thick with tension, and I could see the confusion and embarrassment in Ethan's eyes. That was the moment everything started to unfold. Life settled into a new rhythm after Anderson left for his deployment. The house felt quieter, emptier, but Ethan and I found ways to fill the silence. Mornings started with the smell of coffee and the sound of Ethan's footsteps as he rushed downstairs, always running late for school. "Abby, have you seen my math homework?" he'd ask, his voice panicked as he rummaged through his backpack. I'd smile, handing him the folder he'd left on the kitchen counter the night before. "Right here, kiddo." You'd lose your head if it wasn't attached. He'd grin, sheepish but grateful, and grab a piece of toast before heading out the door. Those small moments, helping him find his homework, packing his lunch, or reminding him to wear a jacket, made me feel needed. It was a strange kind of fulfillment, but it was enough to keep the loneliness at bay. Afternoons were my favorite. I'd come home from coaching volleyball at the community center, and Ethan would be waiting for me, usually sprawled on the couch with his headphones on, nodding along to some song I'd never heard of. "How was school?" I'd ask, dropping my bag by the door. He'd shrug, pulling off his headphones. "Same as always. Boring." But then he'd tell me about his day, the math test he aced, the girl in his history class who smiled at him, the teacher who gave him extra credit for no reason. I loved those conversations. They made me feel like I was part of his world, like I mattered to him in a way no one else did. As the weeks went by, Ethan and I grew closer. I started to see him not just as my stepson, but as someone I could lean on. He was mature for his age, maybe because he'd grown up without a mother, or maybe because his father's absence had forced him to grow up faster. Whatever the reason, he had a way of making me feel seen. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, I came home to find Ethan in the kitchen trying to make dinner. The sight of him standing there, apron tied awkwardly around his waist, made me laugh. "What's all this?" I asked, setting my bag down. He looked up, a smear of tomato sauce on his cheek. "I thought I'd surprise you. You've been working so hard lately, and I wanted to help." My heart swelled. "That's sweet of you, Ethan, but you know you don't have to do this, right?" He shrugged, stirring the pot of spaghetti on the stove. "I know, but I wanted to." We ate dinner together that night, laughing at his slightly overcooked pasta and joking about his future as a chef. It was moments like those that made me forget about the loneliness, even if just for a little while. But there were other moments too, moments that made me pause, moments that made me wonder if I was crossing a line. Like the time I hugged him after he helped me carry groceries inside, and he held on a little longer than usual. Or the time we were watching a movie and he leaned his head on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. I told myself it was innocent, that it was just a boy seeking comfort from the closest thing he had to a mother. But deep down, I knew there was something more, something neither of us was ready to acknowledge. The tension between us grew slowly, almost imperceptibly. It was in the way he looked at me sometimes, his eyes lingering a little too long. It was in the way he brushed against me when we passed each other in the hallway, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. One Saturday afternoon, we were playing volleyball in the backyard. The sun was high in the sky, and the air was warm, the kind of day that made you forget your troubles. We were laughing, teasing each other, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Then it happened again. I went to hug him after a particularly good play, and I felt it, the unmistakable hardness pressing against me. My breath caught, and I pulled away quickly, my heart pounding. "Good job, Ethan," I said, forcing a smile. He looked at me, his cheeks flushed, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. "Thanks, Abby," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. We kept playing, but the air between us was different now, charged with something I couldn't quite name. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just a teenage boy's hormones acting up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept replaying the moment in my mind. Had I done something wrong? Had I crossed a line without realizing it? The questions swirled in my head, keeping me awake long into the night. It was one of those perfect California afternoons, bright blue skies, a gentle breeze, and the kind of warmth that made you want to stay outside forever. I'd just gotten home from coaching my volleyball class, and Ethan was waiting for me in the backyard, bouncing a ball against the side of the house. "Hey, Abby," he called out as I walked through the gate. "Wanna play?" I smiled, setting my bag down on the patio. "You're on, kiddo. But don't think I'll go easy on you just because you're my stepson." He grinned, tossing the ball to me. "Bring it on." We started playing, the sound of the ball hitting our palms and the occasional burst of laughter filling the air. It was moments like these that made me forget about the loneliness, the emptiness that had been creeping into my life. With Ethan, I felt alive, needed, like I had a purpose. We were evenly matched, both of us competitive in our own ways. He'd spike the ball, and I'd dive to save it, my knees scraping against the grass. I'd serve it back, and he'd leap to block it, his movements fluid and confident. It was fun, exhilarating, and for a while I forgot about everything else. The game grew more intense as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. We were both sweating, our breaths coming in short bursts, but neither of us wanted to stop. "You're going down, Abby," Ethan teased, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I laughed, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "In your dreams, kiddo." He served the ball, and I dove to return it, my fingers barely grazing the surface. It flew back over the net, and Ethan leaped to spike it, his body moving with a grace that surprised me. The ball hit the ground on my side, and he let out a triumphant whoop. "That's game," he shouted, throwing his arms in the air. I shook my head, pretending to be annoyed, but I couldn't help smiling. All right, you win. Happy now?" He grinned, jogging over to me. "You're just mad because I'm better than you." I rolled my eyes, playfully shoving his shoulder. "Keep dreaming, kid." And then it happened. I went to hug him like I always did after our games, but this time was different. As my arms wrapped around him, I felt it, the unmistakable hardness pressing against me. My breath caught, and for a split second I froze, my mind racing. Was this really happening? I pulled away quickly, forcing a smile. "Good game, Ethan," I said, my voice a little too bright. He looked at me, his cheeks flushed, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. "Thanks, Abby," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. The air between us was thick with tension as we gathered the ball and headed back inside. I tried to act normal, chatting about dinner plans and asking about his homework, but my mind was elsewhere. Had I done something wrong? Had I crossed a line without realizing it? Ethan seemed just as uneasy, his responses short and his eyes darting away whenever I looked at him. We moved around the kitchen like strangers, the easy camaraderie we'd shared just moments ago replaced by an awkward silence. "I'm going to go take a shower," he said finally, setting the ball down on the counter. I nodded, forcing another smile. "All right. Dinner will be ready in about an hour." He nodded and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I leaned against the counter, my heart still pounding, and replayed the moment in my mind. It was just a hug, I told myself, a harmless, innocent hug. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The way he'd held on a little too long, the way his body had reacted, it wasn't something I could ignore. I busied myself with dinner, chopping vegetables and stirring a pot of soup, but my mind kept drifting back to the backyard. What did this mean? What did it say about me? About us? By the time Ethan came back downstairs, showered and dressed in fresh clothes, I'd managed to push the thoughts to the back of my mind. We ate dinner in silence, the tension between us palpable, and I couldn't help but wonder if things would ever be the same. The days after the volleyball game were a blur. I tried to act normal, to pretend like nothing had happened, but the tension between Ethan and me was impossible to ignore. Every glance, every word, every accidental touch felt charged with something I couldn't quite name. And then there was the loneliness. It had always been there, lurking in the background, but now it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. Anderson had been gone for months, and the silence in the house was deafening. I missed him, his laugh, his touch, the way he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. I tried to distract myself with work, with chores, with anything that would keep my mind off the emptiness, but it was no use. The loneliness followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of what I didn't have. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt the tears come. They started slowly, a few drops at first, but soon I was sobbing, my body shaking with the force of it. I missed Anderson so much it hurt, and the thought of spending another night alone was almost too much to bear. Ethan seemed just as lost as I was. He'd always been a quiet kid, but now he was withdrawn, spending hours in his room with the door closed. I tried to talk to him, to ask him how he was doing, but he'd just shrug and mumble something about being fine. I knew he wasn't fine. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he avoided looking at me, in the way he flinched whenever I got too close. He was confused, scared, and I didn't know how to help him. One evening, as I was washing the dishes, Ethan came into the kitchen. He stood there for a moment, watching me, before finally speaking. Abby? I turned to look at him, my hands still wet from the sink. Yeah, kiddo. He hesitated, his eyes starting to the floor. Do you ever feel? I don't know, like you're not sure what's real anymore. My heart ached for him. I knew exactly what he meant, but I didn't know how to explain it. Sometimes I said softly, but it's okay to feel that way. Life can be confusing, especially when you're growing up. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied with my answer. He lingered for a moment longer before turning and walking away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The breaking point came a few nights later. I was in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo of Anderson on the nightstand. He looked so handsome in his uniform, his smile bright and confident. I missed him so much it hurt. There was a knock on the door, and I looked up to see Ethan standing there, his face pale and his eyes wide. Abby, he said, his voice trembling. What's wrong, Ethan? I asked, standing up. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to me and wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my shoulder. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do, but then I felt his body shaking and realized he was crying. I'm scared, he whispered, his voice barely audible. My heart broke for him. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close, and for a moment it felt like we were the only two people in the world. But then I felt it, the unmistakable hardness pressing against me. My breath caught, and I pulled away quickly, my heart pounding. Ethan, I started, but the words caught in my throat. He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and fear, and I knew I had to do something. But what? The room was silent except for the sound of our breathing, heavy and uneven. Ethan stood in front of me, his eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear and something else, something I couldn't quite place. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, but I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Abby, he whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't know what to say. My body felt frozen, caught between the instinct to pull away and the overwhelming need to comfort him. He was just a boy, my stepson, but in that moment he looked so lost, so vulnerable, that all I wanted was to make him feel safe. It's okay, I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure him or myself. He took a step closer, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch my arm. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through me, and I felt my breath catch. This was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But I couldn't bring myself to stop him. The next few moments weren't straight. Ethan's hands moved hesitantly, his touch tentative but insistent. I could feel the heat of his skin through the fabric of my shirt, and it sent a shiver down my spine. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to pull away, but my body didn't listen. Abby, he whispered again, his voice breaking. I don't know what's happening. I didn't know either. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't untangle. Guilt, fear, longing, they all crashed together, leaving me paralyzed. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out to him. My hands found his face, cupping his cheeks, and I felt the warmth of his skin beneath my fingers. He leaned into the touch, his eyes closing, and for a moment it felt like we were the only two people in the world. But it wasn't right. It wasn't real. I pulled away suddenly, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan, we can't, I said, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Why not? I didn't have an answer, or maybe I did, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I turned away, my hands trembling as I tried to steady my breathing. It all happened. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Ethan's eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. The weight of what had just happened, what I had allowed to happen, was crushing. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. No, Ethan. This isn't your fault. It's mine. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. I wanted to say something, to explain, to make him understand, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my hands shaking as I buried my face in them. What had I done? How had I let this happen? The guilt was overwhelming, a heavy weight pressing down on me, and I felt the tears come again. This wasn't supposed to happen. None of this was supposed to happen. I avoided Ethan as much as I could after that, retreating into myself and burying my emotions under a mountain of guilt and shame. I'd wake up early, before he was even out of bed, and spend the day at the community center, coaching volleyball or organizing equipment. When I came home, I'd lock myself in my room, pretending to be busy with work or chores. But the tension in the house was palpable. It hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating and inescapable. Ethan tried to talk to me a few times, his voice hesitant and unsure, but I shut him down every time. "Not now, Ethan," I'd say, my tone sharper than I intended. He'd nod, his eyes filled with hurt, and walk away without another word. It broke my heart to see him like that, but I didn't know what else to do. Every time I looked at him, I was reminded of what had happened, of the line I'd crossed, and the guilt was overwhelming. Ethan was just as lost as I was. I could see it in the way he moved through the house, his shoulders slumped and his eyes downcast. He spent most of his time in his room, the door closed, and when he did come out, he barely spoke. One evening, as I was sitting on the couch pretending to read a book, I heard his door open. He walked into the living room, his hands shoved in his pockets, and stood there for a moment, watching me. "Abby," he said finally, his voice soft and uncertain. I looked up, my heart pounding. "Yeah." He hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. "Are you mad at me?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. "No, Ethan," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not mad at you." "Then why are you avoiding me?" I didn't have an answer, or maybe I did, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I looked away, my hands trembling as I clutched the book in my lap. Ethan didn't press the issue. He just stood there for a moment longer before turning and walking away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The guilt was crushing. It followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of what I'd done, of the line I'd crossed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the growing realization of the gravity of my actions. What had I been thinking? How could I have let things go so far? Ethan was just a boy, my stepson, and I'd betrayed his trust in the worst possible way. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that it wasn't entirely my fault, that I'd been lonely and vulnerable, but the excuses rang hollow. There was no justification for what had happened, no way to undo it. The guilt was a living thing, a shadow that followed me everywhere I went. It clung to me, heavy and suffocating, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. Every time I looked at Ethan, I was reminded of what I'd done, the way he avoided my gaze, the way his shoulders slumped when I walked into a room. It was a constant reminder of the line I'd crossed. I wanted to apologize, to explain, to make him understand that it wasn't his fault, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I retreated further into myself, burying my emotions under a mountain of guilt and shame. I stopped coaching volleyball, stopped going out with friends, stopped doing anything that might force me to confront the reality of what had happened. The house felt like a prison, the walls closing in on me with every passing day. The decision to leave didn't come all at once. It started as a fleeting thought, a desperate attempt to escape the guilt and shame that had consumed me. But as the days turned into weeks, the thought grew stronger, more insistent, until it was all I could think about. I couldn't stay here. Not after what had happened, not after the way I'd betrayed Ethan's trust. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made up my mind. I would leave. I would pack my things, write a note, and disappear before anyone could stop me. The next morning, I started packing. I filled my suitcase with clothes, toiletries, and a few sentimental items, trying to be as quiet as possible so Ethan wouldn't hear. When I was done, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a piece of paper. My hand trembled as I wrote, "Ethan, I'm so sorry for everything. Please know that none of this is your fault. Take care of your dad and be a good boy. Love, Abby." I folded the note and left it on the table, my heart pounding as I grabbed my suitcase and walked out the door. I walked down the street, hailed a cab, and off I went. At first, I wasn't sure where I was going. I just wanted to get out of the house. out of the guilt that had swallowed my whole self as a woman. It's been 5 years now. I haven't set eyes on Ethan or my husband. You'd think with his nature of job they'd have a way of tracking someone down. Somehow, he found me. I still couldn't tell him the truth. I made up another story, and yes, he believed it. That made me feel even more guilty. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you're intrigued by the story so far, be sure to hit the subscribe icon at the bottom right side of your screen to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for more real-life infidelity stories every day. See you in the next video. Stay tuned.